All right, everybody. We're just going to give people about 1 or 2 more minutes now to dial in, and we'll get started right away. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for this webcast on advanced topics on the Mirth Connect interface engine. Thank you all for joining. We really appreciate you guys, taking a little bit of time out of your day to learn some stuff with us. And this is actually the second webcast that we've done on this topic on Mirth Connect. We did one earlier, probably around December of 2015, that served more as an introduction to this application, where we kind of went through on a high level what the purpose of Mirth Connect is and what are the many different things that you can do with it. We reviewed some of the different screens and tools that are offered by Mirth Connect. And as I'll mention towards the end of this presentation, you can actually find that webcast on YouTube if you just look up Galen Healthcare Solutions Mirth Connect. And that's free and online. So today, with the second webcast on Mirth Connect, we're going to dive much deeper and really get into some of the more interesting things that we've learned over the past couple of years with working with Mirth Connect for our many different clients. We'll review lots of the little tricks that have improved our experience with Mirth and the different things that we've built that have made it easier for our clients to then maintain their Mirth Connect implementation. So during the presentation, during this webcast, all microphones have been automatically muted, but if you do have a question, you can submit it through the WebEx Q&A panel, as you can see here on this slide. If we have any time at the end of the presentation, we'll try to answer a few of them. And any questions that we don't have time to answer, I'll try to follow up with individually via email. So my name is Nate Betza, and I'm a technical consultant here at Galen Healthcare Solutions. I'm based in Boston, Mass, and I work on a variety of different projects for Galen, mostly specializing around custom programming projects, helping hospitals connect to state HIEs, or data migration, so a conversion between one EMR to another, as well as HL7 interface development. And really with all of these different fields of work, Mirth Connect for me has been very useful and has played a principal role in many of these engagements. I've been working with Mirth now, Mirth Connect application, for about 2 years, and in general I've been in the healthcare IT space now for about 5 years. And just before we get started, we're going to launch a really quick poll question to get an idea from our audience of what interface engines your organization is currently using. So if you could just, through the WebEx panel, just select any of the interface engines you might be using. Or if one's not listed, you could type it into the other screen, and we'll give everyone just a couple of minutes. Really, it's probably 30 seconds actually to do that.
Thanks, Nate. I'm looking at the polling data right now, and so far it looks like Rhapsody and CIE are currently in the lead, but Mirth Connect is next. So it looks like this is definitely going to be a useful webcast for folks who are actually utilizing Mirth Connect at this point. I'll leave the poll open for a little bit longer, and hopefully we can get a few more answers.
Awesome. Thanks, Logan. Yeah, so it's great to see that a lot of our audience today has some familiarity with Mirth. Some of the topics that we'll get into might be very specific to certain use cases that you might be familiar with Mirth. But also for our viewers who are new to Mirth, I think today's webcast will serve as well a good kind of peek to what you can do and what the capabilities are. Okay, so we'll wrap this poll up now and get started. So the topics that we're going to review today involve sort of 4 main areas. The first one we wanted to go over was performance tweaks. So the little tricks that you can use to speed up Mirth, to minimize disk space waste, to overall make this interface engine work for you in a production setting. Then we'll move into security improvements, things like how you might encrypt message content stored on your server, how you might prohibit sort of unwarranted access to the Mirth application itself. We'll even touch a little bit on how you might import certificates for SSL. Then we'll go into programming suggestions that we have. So these are little snippets of JavaScript code that we'll show that can improve a variety of processes for you. For example, channel deployment between different development and production environments. We'll even touch on the importance of centralizing common settings and common pieces of code. We'll even demo a little bit on how you might use an external JavaScript library in Mirth. And then for the final section, we'll talk a little bit on maintenance strategies. So we'll touch on using a database as a backend, how you might make an XML variable easier to read in Mirth, and different pieces on logging and disk space usage as well. And again, like we said earlier, if there's time for Q&A, we'll try to answer a few. So first section, performance tweaks. One of the first things that I find has been really important for any implementation of Mirth that I've been a part of is leveraging what's called channel metadata in Mirth. And what channel metadata serves as is a way to add to the message log screen in Mirth, which is sort of this screenshot we have below, a screen that all of us who maintain our Mirth implementations are regularly looking at, is how can we add more information to it instead of just the usual default information like the dates that messages have begun to be processed. So how you set this up is basically when you're in the channel main settings page, there's a section called custom metadata. And what you want to do here is you want to define the columns that you're going to be using. In this case, we define 3 of them: patient ID, attending physician, and insurance. You'll note that the way these are spelled here are the same way they appear here. And then what we need to do is we need to provide where that information is coming from, in this case, from a variable mapping. So on the left side here, what we're showing is some snippet of JavaScript code where we're taking information out of an HL7 message. Let's say this was an ADP channel. We're sending basic patient demographic data. And we're putting, we're pulling the information that we want, like the patient ID, the physician's name, insurance, out of the HL7 message, and then mapping them to a channel variable. And you'll note again that the names that we see here are the same names of those variables there. So what does this ultimately do for us? Well, like I said before, it adds some clarity to our message logs. You could quickly scroll through the messages that have come in, and you can see, okay, what message belongs to which patient or which provider, what insurance company. But there are actually a couple more things that make this pretty useful as well. For one, this can be used to minimize data storage needs. In a few slides later, we're going to show off the different storage settings that Mirth grants you for how much of each message you want to store, how many of its transformations, etc. But you could actually get rid of all of a channel's messages contents if you kept and maintained just this metadata here. because sometimes you don't need to go into the full message to find anything. This might be the only thing that you might need. So if that's the case, you could lower your storage settings and just rely on this metadata here and really decrease the amount of space you're using on your server. The second reason, and for me personally, the reason that I like using channel metadata the most is it speeds up how you search for messages. With metadata, what you're doing if you think about it from the back-end side is, in a sense, you're kind of creating a discrete column in a database almost, where what you've mapped can be stored. So when you're searching for a message, you can hop into the advanced screen. It'll pull up the advanced search filter, and at the bottom you can enter in what the name of the metadata column was. So you'll see this is a drop-down that's going to look at the different columns that you've created. And then you can enter in whatever value you want to search for. So when you hit OK and then you hit search, this is going to basically, as you see here, search for all messages with Blue Cross. But the reason it's faster is because it's specifically searching for this mapped information instead of doing a text-based search on your entire message. So if your channel involves CCDs or PDF documents, things that are giant in size, it can take Mirth a really long time, naturally, to search through those entire contents for however many messages just to find one thing, when here you're discretely indicating where that information is. So this is one of the biggest performance tweaks, I think, that anyone can implement very easily. The next part involves heap memory, and I think anyone who has set up Mirth or has worked with Mirth for a period of time will eventually encounter something they're going to need to tweak. So the heap size and heap memory involves what's called Java virtual memory. So Mirth Connect was considered a Java application, and Java applications like to sort of allocate a certain amount of memory, certain amount of RAM for any of its applications. By default, Mirth might use a certain amount of memory because its expectation is you're just setting it up for the first time. If you move into a production environment where you're getting many, many millions of messages or thousands of messages, you might need to tweak those settings. And there's two settings to keep in mind. The first one involves the heap size for the front-end application, so what's called the administrator, the place where we as users sort of interact with Mirth. The way that you can increase or decrease that size is when you pull up the server manager, hitting this little wrench here next to the administrator, and then you'll get this little pop-up here where you can edit and change the size, and you can increment it up to 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabytes, etc. But as Mirth does note, you do have to be careful. If you set this too high to a number, for example, that's more than the available space actually available on your server, then the application won't start. So keep that in mind. And really, this plays an important role when you're searching through messages, for example, with a channel that has a lot of traffic. So Mirth does need to pull into memory many messages now because you're searching for them. So you want to give the application the flexibility to do that. The second memory setting that we can change and work with is the server memory setting. And this is involving Mirth on the back-end side. So when Mirth is set up to run autonomously, there as well needs to be an amount of RAM allocated for that purpose. So if Mirth is handling large messages, perhaps it's transforming PDF documents or images or doing any work with large messages or heavy traffic, again, we want to give Mirth the amount of virtual memory that it needs to do that safely. Next up, security improvements. one of the first things I think that people can encounter in Mirth and quickly fix to increase the overall security of their platform is to encrypt the database password that is stored in plain text by default in your Mirth configuration file. So this here again in the server manager screen is something that we've all probably worked with before. This is how we connect our Mirth application with a database backend in order to store messages in a database. Even though here we can't see the password, this screen is really just an interface to place everything else in a configuration file. This file is actually called mirth.properties, and you'll find it under the program files folder, specifically the Mirth Connect one. So this same password and username that we have here looks like this in the backend. It looks like this on that configuration file. Now, if anyone were to get access to the server where you have Mirth installed, they could find this file quite easily, and they could pull out that password and log into your database. And if this is the same database where your EMR is running or any other valuable product, obviously that's a vulnerability that you want to take care of. So there's one really quick fix, actually, that can protect us in this situation. In that same file, anywhere towards the top, if you add this one line of code, encryption.properties equals 1, this is going to basically encrypt that password in the file so it's no longer visible in sort of a human-readable form. All you need to do, add that line, save the file, and restart the Mirth Connect service. And once you open this file again, you'll notice, okay, now the password has changed. Similarly, let's say then that you didn't want to use that setting, or someone through another way managed to get access to your database. You can still actually encrypt the content of your messages. There is this setting. It's very easy to set up. You'll see it under your message storage setting on your channel. What this is going to do is it's going to basically make it so that on the database, if you were looking at these messages, they would be encrypted. No one in your database would be able to read them easily. The only thing to keep in mind, though, as Mirth kind of warns us, is that content is no longer searchable. So like in one of those earlier slides we were looking at before, you can't actually do a search anymore on anything within the text contents. However, you can use the metadata search that we've reviewed. If you do choose to use this setting, you can actually sort of customize a little bit further the encryption protocol and sort of the intensity of the encryption. Here are a few settings that you can pull and you can add to your configuration file. Once again, once you've added them in, like AES encryption, 256 bits, you do have to restart the Mirth service in order for that to be enacted. Another thing that you might encounter as you work with different third parties to send or receive data is the need to work with a self-signed certificate. There have been actually a couple of projects that I've been a part of where I needed to send financial data, so DFT, HL7 Messages, to a third party, and I needed to send that over the HTTPS protocol, so sort of a secured web post. In that case, the third-party vendors, they were using their own self-signed certificate. They created their own SSL certificate. In order to then actually send this data securely, then I needed to import that certificate. If you don't have a paid support license with Mirth, you kind of have to do this sort of on your own. The paid license comes with something called the SSL Manager Plugin, where you can sort of, in the Mirth Connect interface web app or application, you can import and manage certificates for each channel. But if you don't have that license, you kind of have to do this on your own. So here we kind of want to show how you might do that. Let's say that the client or the third party provides for you their certificate file. What you need to do then is you need to import that to the Java Trust Store on your server where Mirth is installed. Now, by default, there's not really an application on your computer, on your Windows operating system that can do that for you. So one application that we recommend that's free and you can download online is an application called Portical. If you download Portical, what you need to do now is you need to find that Java Trust Store file. It's usually located in if you go into the Java installation folder on your server, under the configuration folder, you'll find a file called CA certs. So what you're going to want to do is open CA certs in Portical. Portical is going to ask you, what is the password to open that key store? And by default, unless you've changed it, on any computer, it will always be just change it without these quotes. So if you enter change it, you hit OK, all of a sudden now you're going to see all the different certificates that have that are sort of already trusted on your computer. And what you're going to want to do next is you're going to want to hit the import trusted certificate button, and then you can find the certificate file that the third-party vendor has provided with you securely. Again, it's really important that if you receive this file, it's sent to you securely, because if anyone gets access to this file, they could basically break the encryption for your connection. Once you have that file and you've imported it, you're going to hit OK a couple of times, and you've basically now enabled any connections through a secured capacity that are using this certificate. So if we go into a channel then, and let's say again that it's a channel that we're sending financial data, we're going to just enter in here the URL where we want to send data to through a post, and we can assume then that the connection is safe and encrypted. You'll notice that again, like I mentioned before, if you don't have a paid license, then you're still going to get this sort of red X mark, and this is really just because Mirth Connect wants to encourage you to get a license with them in order to have their SSL Manager. However, we can trust that this is working as we expected it to. Moving on to programming suggestions. Before we get started, actually, with talking about programming suggestions, I did want to get an idea of how much experience you have with Mirth, because this will be maybe one of our more technical sections of this podcast. So we've opened up the poll, and we want to know, are you just starting off with Mirth? Have you ever worked with Mirth at all? Or have you already been using it for a couple of years? I think that'll dictate a little bit, too, of how much detail I get into next.
Yeah, so far, Nate, it looks like we've got a pretty good mix across here. About 10% with 3+ years experience, 17% across the just starting, and 1 to 2 years each, and a little over 25% with none so far. So as we'd expect, you know, it's fewer people with the longer time, but definitely a good mix.
Okay, great. So I think this will be pretty useful then, because it's sort of around this mark of just starting to use Mirth, or you've been using it for about a year, that these tricks that we'll get into next, I think, become more and more helpful. Okay, cool. We'll move forward then. So I think based on how new you are to Mirth, this, or really how long you've been using Mirth, this might be something that's more obvious, but we definitely wanted to touch on this. This involves the code template screen in Mirth. Just like with any programming practice, it's important that if you have code that is going to be reused, it's code that is going to be used in multiple places, that it's written and stored in only one place so that if you were to change something, to make one quick change, you wouldn't have to go into multiple places and make that same change, sort of all centralized. It's sort of the concept that's called as abstraction in programming. And you can do that with Mirth. Mirth actually makes it very easy for us and has a whole section dedicated to it. And that section is called the code template screen, which we have here on the left. So let's take an example, actually. Let's say that you have two channels that are sending HL7 messages. The first channel is a DFT channel. You're sending financial information. And your second channel is an ADP channel. You're sending demographic information. Mirth, HL7 messages, they like to use a standardized date format, something that looks like, if you can see it here, where you have years, months, days, then hours, minutes, and seconds, sort of no hyphens, no slashes, none of that kind of formatting. Now, if that's the case, then we know right away that there are two channels where we need to format a date. If a date comes in from a database, for example, and it has such a format that includes slashes or hyphens, then we need to remove that formatting. Now, we're doing this in two places. So you could create a function that takes in a date from a database and changes it. And you could put it in both places, but if you notice at whatever time that function wasn't as optimized as you want it to be, or you needed to change it anyway, you'd have to change it in both places. So let's use instead a code template. Here, as you can see in the code template, I've created a function where we're doing exactly that. We're converting a date from a SQL format to one that's in the HL7 standard. And without getting into too much detail about how that function works, you can see it here later if you'd like. The purpose is just to show that, okay, we've defined in this separate section here the date, and we've defined in this code template here how to do that. And then in our transformers, we're referencing that function. So in both channels here, we have our transformers. What we're doing right off the bat is we're going in, pulling out of the HL7 message that came in the date of birth in a format that was not what we wanted, and then we're changing that. We're reformatting that information and then placing it in the outgoing HL7 message. And so again, like I said, this just helps keep our code clean. It helps us have one place where we can make any changes that we need and quickly deploy that change to all of our channels. It also helps us avoid putting in our transformers a lot of extra information, a lot of long code chunks that we don't need. We kind of keep our code as clean as possible. Next is the section I wanted to go over regarding how you might modify an HL7 message with database data. Take, for example, an ADP channel. Let's say that you have access at the beginning to an internal patient ID, but in your HL7 message, you want to put in the patient's MRN. that can look like this here. So if this is your incoming HL7 message and you wanted to transform it, you wanted to put here in PID4 the MRN number, how might you do that? Here in this slide, we're showing a couple things we've talked about already, such as using a code template. The first code template that I'll show is one I've created where I'm creating a database connection object. This is going to allow me to go into the database and pull out the MRN from the database. I've done it like this. I've created a code template for that because I know in many other channels I'm going to need to create a database connection. So in our transformer, that's the first step we do. The second step is we go and we pull out of the HL7 message the internal patient ID. See here, that's PID 3.1, which is this GUID here in this sort of hypothetical example. And the next step now is taking that patient ID, let's query our database, our clinical database. Let's go to the patient registration table and pull out the MRN for them. Here's a little screenshot of what that might look like. Let's say you had a table that had that ID and that also now has that patient MRN number. And this is sort of what we want to pull out and put in our HL7 message. So once you've formed your query, the next step is to execute it. How you might do that, so you're going to use the database connection that you've created, dbcon, that's sort of how I call it, and then use the function execute cached query, and you enter in sort of the SQL string that you've created. Now you're going to open up the results, if there are any, and you're going to use the getString function to pick out a specific column that you've already named in your function. In this case, we're selecting patient MRN, so the patient MRN is what I'm putting here. This is now going to put in this variable the number that we wanted. And now the final step is to actually add this to the outgoing HL7 message. And now how do you transform a message then? How do you put data into an HL7 message that's already come through your channel? And I think this is a piece that many of us get stuck on at first. It's a little confusing. Well, if you're in a transformer, there's two variables that are built into Mirth that are important to know. There's the MSG variable and the TMP variable. The MSG variable is your incoming message. This is the message that came into Mirth at the time, at the very beginning, came into your channel in Mirth. This is not something you can change. This is a static piece of information. You do not have the ability to edit MSG as it is. Instead, what you want to do is you want to use the TMP variable. And the TMP variable is built into Mirth. This is whatever TMP ends up being is what's going to leave the destination or the transformer in your channel. So the first step is to copy the state of the incoming message, which is in the MSG variable, into your TMP variable. And now with that, you can finally make any changes you'd like. So you can see here, we're going into the PID 4.1 segment, and we're putting in that MRN that we desired, this one here. And again, to note the difference is above, we were pulling out of the incoming MSG variable information that we wanted. And on our way out, we're putting something into the TMP variable, what we wanted. So we can see sort of the output of what this transformer is going to create. It's going to put that 1, 2, 3, 4 patient MRN that we were looking for. Next up is common channel settings. This again has to do with the sort of the principle of abstraction, the principle of centralizing information that's going to be put in multiple places. Let's say that you have two channels that both read from a database. They both pull data out of a database. Now, when you're setting that channel up, you normally might be putting in the URL of your database and the username and password, sort of the SQL credentials. But your SQL credentials could expire at any time. You might migrate servers and move your database to a different address. And if you do that, then you would have to go into all of your channels and make updates to each one in order to correct those changes. However, that creates room for human error. You might forget to change one of the channels, update them, or you might make a typo. You can't even really see what password you're typing in. You can make a mistake that way as well. So instead, Mirth allows us to put that information in a global mapped variable, so meaning a variable that's accessible anywhere in Mirth at the time that Mirth launches or your channel is deployed. In this case, let's move these common settings to the global scripts where we can define those globally mapped variables, such as the URL, the username, and the password. And then using kind of this sort of funky syntax, we can actually type that in and pull those settings down. So you can see here, you use sort of this money sign followed by 2 squiggly brackets, and then the name of the variable that you've mapped. And now once we deploy this channel, these values here are going to be pulled from your global script. I think another common idea here again is the principle sort of environment strategies. So this came up for me recently where I was working with a client that had 2 Mirth servers. They had a server for development and testing. Anytime they wanted to work on a new feature, they would develop it in this separate server, a separate instance of Mirth, and test it there. And then when they were ready to move it to production, they had a second server for dedicated solely to production use, and we would import and export channels into the production server. Now, one thing that we found ourselves doing a lot is when we were looking at, for example, connecting to the database, each channel would need to be updated when we moved it into the production server because we now needed to use the production database instead of the test database. So we thought of a way that we could sort of programmatically, dynamically set that information. Now, what you could do is something that we've tried here, using the global scripts to basically allow Mirth to figure out if this is a production environment or test environment, and then set variables accordingly. Java actually comes with a function that you can use that you'll see here on line 6 of this screenshot, where it can pull the name of the server where Mirth is running. And if you also define for yourself what that name would be if it was the production server or the test server, then you can create an if-else statement that is going to compare that. So basically, let's take the server name that Java has figured out that this server is, and if it's the production environment, then here are our production settings, so our production database, production SQL credentials. Or if this is the test server, then use these settings instead. So for one thing, what that can do is that now allows anywhere that you are connecting to a database, for example, for that to be sort of automatically set. It also allows you as well to dictate certain behavior, desired behavior for your channels. For example, with that same client, we had one process where we wanted to run a nightly process that would send an email report for the day. It would look in a database and kind of give us, quantify for us how many messages we've sent today. Well, we didn't want that report coming from both the test and the production server. We only wanted it from the production server. So what we did is, using this system that we've already curated, we added a filter to that destination that was creating these email reports that looked to see, okay, if this is the test environment, then activate a filter. So block this message from going out, block this email from being sent. If it's the production environment, then move forth with it. So what that ultimately enabled for us is sort of a seamless deployment strategy between our development and our production environments. We no longer had to do any human manual fixing of settings when we were moving a channel, pulling it out of the test environment and exporting it into, or importing it into the production environment. Another feature that is built into Mirth that I think is cool to note is how you might route a message to another channel. Let's think of it. Let's look at an example here where we want to connect. For example, we want to connect to perhaps a state HIE and figure out a status of a patient. We want to see if we already have any information about a patient. So we set up a channel, in this case hypothetically called Get Patient Status. It connects to a certain web service, and making a SOAP request is going to figure out some information about that patient. If the patient already exists in the HIE, maybe next what we want to do is update that patient's demographic data. Or if it doesn't exist, if that patient does not exist in the state HIE, maybe we want to create that patient. So essentially what we're trying to do here is, depending on a variety of factors, how can we then take our message and relay it to a different channel? Mirth does that for us with a function called router.routeMessage by channel ID. So in this example I said before, let's say that you call out to that HIE and you get a response back. In your response transformer, you could look in the response message that came back from the HIE, in this example, and if it told us that the patient already exists, now we can take our message and we can route it to the update patient channel by using that function and by passing in as the first parameter the ID of that channel. And you'll know the ID if you go into your channel screen and you look at this long string that you'll find there, this GUID for that channel. Similarly, if the patient does not already exist, then you can route it to the other channel using that GUID. This could be useful for many different cases, anytime where you have channels that are interdependent upon each other. And here's another sort of custom thing that we've put together. We found that it was often hard for us, if we were using filtering logic in Mirth, to know why something was filtered. By default, really the only information you get is that a message was filtered. But if you have multiple filters, you won't know why. You won't know which filter activated the problem or basically triggered the filtering logic. So what we decided to do for one client where we had many filters on our channel, filters that would be activated if, in this case, for example, an ADT where a date of birth was missing or a social security number was missing in our message, then we didn't want to send that message out. what we developed was using custom metadata. We created a new column called filter reason. And then in our filters, whenever we knew that we were going to activate a filter, let's say in this case here, because the date of birth that we pulled out of in our HL7 message was empty, it was missing, we immediately map that variable filter reason, and we provide a string explaining why. So a totally custom way of solving something that might be unclear to you. So adding more clarity again to your channel messages screen. And then next, it involves JavaScript libraries. We know that we actually got this request to talk about this from our previous webcast. Someone had asked us about this very question. And this is something that's actually very useful. So what is a JavaScript library? A JavaScript library is code that is already written in the JavaScript language to solve a particular need that someone has made open source, meaning it's free to use and it can really help you out. We had a case where we needed to encrypt files that were stored on our server. So we would take in real files like images or PDFs, store them on the same server where Mirth was before we could then move them on to somewhere else. And in order to do that, we needed to come up with a way that we could encrypt those files. So if someone, again, got into that server and got into the folder where the files are stored, they couldn't just open up the file and see the image, see the PDF, see sort of sensitive patient health information. So we looked up a library that could do that for us, and we found one called LoadCrypto.js. So how might we then use that? Well, what we did is we created a code template, and we copied in all the source code for that JavaScript library. Now, if you've ever done web development or programming and you've referenced libraries before, you don't necessarily need to do something like this. You don't have to copy all the code locally, but it's advised because this grants you the full control of knowing that the library will always look the same way that you expected it to, that a developer on the other side who's maintaining the library hasn't made a change that is going to break a function that you were relying on, for example. So we like to move our libraries into code templates, and then we reference them. So let's say in our code template where we're doing the encryption of our files, the way we get started is we create a variable. We load our library in by creating it as a function. Then we go into our XML message, and with a certain hash string, we can encrypt our message. And this piece of code here is really derived from the library itself. But just as an example, this is how we now interact with it. Once we've encrypted our file, now we can write it to our server again, and the file will no longer be accessible sort of in a human readable way. And now for maintenance strategies. For message storage impact, this was something I mentioned really early on in the webcast today. Mirth provides us with a variety of options to dictate how many versions of a message we're going to save. Now, you'll know that when you're looking at the channel messages log, you can view the message at each step of its transformation. You can view the message as it came in and as it left, as it was sent to a third party, and what the response looked like. If you have multiple destinations, then now you have an incoming and an outgoing message for each one. So you can think about the orders of magnitude here if you have very intricate channels with multiple destinations, you're already storing many versions of the same message. And it's important to tweak this accordingly based on really the impact and the traffic of your server. The default setting that we find in channels is the development setting. This uses everything, really every single transformation and incoming and outgoing content for your messages, as well as all the metadata and all the mapped variables that you have used. But not only does that use the most disk space, it can also slow processing time, because with each version of that message, each one needs to get written to the database and pulled from the database when you're pulling up the messages in Mirth. So if you have lots of messages or large messages, you have to think about trying something else. The second level that Mirth offers is the production setting, where you're only getting the raw message, so what it looked like when it came in, the encoded message, and the sent message, so what went outbound, as well as the mapped variables. You're not really getting all the transformations in between. This cuts down a little bit on the amount of data used. And you can actually pair this with additional settings such as the pruning options. Pruning options that might allow Mirth to automatically delete messages that are older than a certain date. So that if you have a troubleshooting window, maybe within 2 weeks, you'll always look at a message within 2 weeks of when it's been sent. If there was something wrong with it, then you can prune messages older than 2 weeks and keep the storage setting like this. The lower tier levels for storage are raw and metadata. Now, the raw option is really giving you the minimum amount of storage that you'll need to still be able to reprocess the message if you had to troubleshoot. Mirth is only going to store what that message looked like when it first came into the channel. With the reason being, if that message errored and you wanted to troubleshoot why, you can still right-click that message and reprocess it because it has its original look. But if you use the metadata-only option, you'll never be able to reprocess the message again, because if you click that message in Mirth and you try to open it up, you won't have anything there to see except those metadata columns that we've mapped. So you really only want to use this when you don't care at all about ever being able to fix a message or ever being able to go in and see what it looked like at any point in its transformation process. You just want the very bare minimum amount of information, and that's why it uses next to no data in comparison to some of the other ones that have orders of magnitude much higher of storage demands. Now, another setting that Mirth is going to recommend for you when you go into production is to make sure you change the database configuration. By default, Mirth is going to come with what's called Apache Derby. It's a very lightweight database system, and it's great for quick deployment and testing. You know, you don't have to worry about standing up a SQL Server instance or MySQL. You don't have to worry about paying for the licenses needed for those database management systems. So you can really quickly install Mirth, play with it, and not even think about all that comes with having a more complex database. However, the caveat with that is you don't get the great features that come with having a more robust database management system, such as PostgreSQL, MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server. Things that can allow you to open up the database directly, maybe through SQL Server Management Studio, if you're familiar with that tool, and interact with the database and look at the tables and monitor storage use. By switching to these other systems, they come built in already with better performance they use disk space more efficiently. They have backup options. Really, everything in Mirth ultimately is going to get saved in the database, not just your messages, but your channels, all the JavaScript code. That's all stored somewhere in your Mirth database. If you use a more rigorous database backend, then you can set up automated backups every night, and you'll know that if anything ever went wrong in Mirth, you could go and look at a database backup from the night before or whenever and find your old Mirth settings all over again. So Mirth Corporation definitely recommends using a database backend. One little trick that we found out recently, but it's actually built into Mirth, is a tool that allows us to look at XML variables in a formatted way. I'm sure many of us here have worked with XML documents before, and if we ever are troubleshooting or we want to log the variable that contains an XML message, a lot of times when we open that variable up, we're going to get this sort of really confusing long single string of XML that is really just not in a format that we can easily read. And we might take this and copy and paste this into our favorite text editor and auto indent. Well, you can actually do that right in Mirth to get this achieved output here. And all you need to do is use the built-in function for get XML util.prettypen. And this is built into Mirth. You don't have to worry about downloading anything. This is really the only line of code that you need. And then in this case, we do that. We store it in a variable in order for me to kind of show off these two examples here. All right. So now we're going to get into our final poll and wrap it up for the day. This last poll here, we just kind of want to ask everybody if you are currently considering a interface engine migration, and if so, how soon? We'll give everybody just about 30 seconds to answer this poll.
Looks like at this point there are a few people looking at upgrades in the next 3 months, next year, a bit further out, but for the most part, looking at more than 50% who are not looking to upgrade at this time. So thank you for answering that. I'll close the poll.
Alrighty, thank you, Logan. Let's keep going now. So wrapping up, some additional resources that I wanted to highlight that people can look at for more information on content that I've written or my colleagues here at Galen have written. We've actually put together 3 things recently. On our blog, you'll find a blog post where we highlight 10 tips and tricks that very similar to the webcast today, kind of different little things that you can use that might make Mirth a little bit better for you. We also have a white paper that we published last year on a little bit more on the security vulnerabilities in Mirth that you can fix either through custom code changes or with Mirth settings that you might not know about. And then, again, like I mentioned before, we do have the first webcast in our series where we talk about Mirth on a more high-level, more fundamental way. We did get 2 questions during the webcast today. They are questions that I probably am not going to answer now because I'd like to look into them a little bit more and get back to you on them. They're questions that involve more on the encryption protocols. And because encryption obviously is a very important thing, I want to make sure I give you guys the right answers. So I will be following up with you as soon as I can on that. And thank you, everyone, so much for joining us today and learning a little bit more about more of the advanced things that you can do in Mirth. And these webcasts will be posted to our wiki page at some point, probably tomorrow or within the next 24 hours. And if there was anything else that we didn't cover or questions that you want to ask and didn't get a chance to ask or we didn't get a chance to review, you can also contact us through our website, galenhealthcare.com, or send me an email. I'd love to, personally chat with you about anything related to Mirth Connect or any of our other products and services. My email is nate.bessa@galenhealthcare.com. And that's it, everybody. Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.